that in general, sources are in agreement that in general, the Iranians were thought in antiquity to consume much or a lot of perfume and musk. I would like to contend the reason that we see this exceeding use of aromatics in the Iranian world is that in the Zoroastrian tradition of late antiquity, there was a strict dualism present, which impacted every aspect of life and the consumption, of course, of fragrances. Here, I would like to mention, of course, the groundbreaking important dissertation by Beatrice Cassou, Audia, the Use and Meaning of Fragrance in the Ancient World and Their Christianization, which mainly deals, of course, with the Christian world. But it's all important because we can use her categorization of what she calls pleasure of atmosphere, where she discusses the different settings in the house, bathhouse, for spectacles and celebrations, how actually fragrance was used for projection of power, as you can see on the screen here, Daryaee sitting on his throne in death rituals, medicine, etc. And I should mention Professor Lloyd Llewellyn Jones from Cardiff, who did mention to me that we should look at these incense burners as this area where the fragrance, of course, or whatever is being burnt is creating a barrier, obviously, between the king and his space and the courtiers who or whoever comes to meet him. So that is, of course, something important. But if we go back to the Zoroastrian tradition of late antiquity, as I mentioned, there was a strict dualism present that impacted every aspect of life. Hence, the realm of good aromas, what is known in Middle Persian as boy, scent, presented the world of Ormazd, the supreme being, not only in the corporeal life, but also that of the beyond. In the absence of the sweet and fragrant smells, there was the realm of Ahriman, the evil spirit, which was represented by the term gandagi, by stench. And this is a clear part of this dualistic view of Zoroastrianism. You cannot have a middle place. You either belong to this sort of realm of boy, these aromatics, or the stench. For this reason, the trade in aromatics was not only a desirable luxury that we talk about, of course, quite a lot, but also a religious necessity for Zoroastrianism. Hence, I would like to briefly set out the trade of two aromatics, namely that of musk and jasmine, which became consequential for both Iran and China when contacts became more prevalent. Let's say documented wise, at least from the 5th century. Historically speaking, one of the major notices of Iranian objects and goods reaching the East was in 455, where rugs, jewels, and aromatics reached the Chinese court with Sasanian ambassadors. Of course, however, there must have been earlier contacts, which of course the project that Professor von Reden and Ms. Fabian or Dr. Fabian is working on can illuminate. In antiquity, while there were a host of aromatics which were traded in Asia, a few came obviously from the East. Musk, the scent glands of Asian deer, muscus, was the most famous of the aromatics used or utilized, and it became so important in late antiquity that it must have been the most sought out fragrance in Afro-Eurasia. In the Christian topography of Cosmos, we read, the small animal, again, is the muscus, called in the native tongue katsuri or kasturi. Those who hunt it pierce it with arrows, and having tied up the blood collected at the navel, they cut it away. For this is the part which has the pleasant fragrance known to us by the name musk. Now, part of the trade of musk from the East was in the hands of the famous Sogdian traders who managed to transport it to the Sasanian Empire. Etienne de la Vasière, in his important book on Sogdian traders, has thoroughly investigated the importance of, obviously, the Sogdians in late antiquity, where musk was only one of the commodities which not only came through the land route, but also through sea trade. This is, I think, a translation of Sims Williams, if I'm not mistaken. The Sogdian ancient letters provides a glimpse of musk and how it was distributed from China to the Sogdian. So this is the ancient Sogdian ancient letter 2, which states, and Van Rasmak sent to me to Dong Quang 32 packs or parcels of musk, yaxi, that belong to Takut, so that he can send it to you. When they will be handed to you, divide them into 5 parts, and Taksivindak should take 3 parts out of them, and Pesak should take 1 part, and you should take 1 part. So we're seeing how, as it's moving from the east to west, how this parcels of musk are being divided among the people involved. We are told that annual sum of 1,500 kilograms of musk reached the Mediterranean, no doubt, via Iran through its Persian and then either Armenian or Arab traders and merchants. While in Chinese, this prized aromatic had various names, which I do not want to massacre the Chinese, but I will say it anyhow. Shehesiang, musk deer aromatic, or Shefu, or Hesiang Shang, a fragrant liquid, which is this Arsogdian Yaxi. It is the Middle Persian term, mushk, that became widespread word of choice in the West. In the Syriac loanword as mushka, as Ethiopic mesk, as this fragrance par excellence of antiquity moved from the Sasanian Empire to the Byzantine or the Roman Empire, and entered, of course, in Latin as muscus and Greek as moskos, and then similarly into other Romance languages in Europe. The trade on the Great Khorasan Road, or late antiquity, or what we call the Silk Road, allowed for the trade of musk or moshk from Tibet in the Sasanian period. Now, 2 scholars, Akasoy and Yulei Talilim, have suggested that, in fact, it was not the musk of Khotan, which is well known in Persian literature as mushk Khotan, all the way to Hafez and other authors who invoke the musk of Khotan specifically. It was not that musk that was famed, but rather it was Tibet that produced the musk, which moved along the land route to the Sasanian Iran. So here's Khotan, as you can see, in Tibet, of course, is a bit away in the south. The reason for which this misreading of the original location of musk took place was that musk was gathered in Kashgar and Khotan. So there's Khotan and there's Kashgar, and then shipped to the West. I will tackle this issue below and provide an alternative suggestion to the avenue which musk made its way to Iran. For now, it is important that Mario Maggi has suggested most recently that in the earliest Judo-Persian letters, these are the earliest evidence of classical, what we may call Persian, from the 8th century, the term appears Buye Chini, Chinese perfume in Persian, was probably the reference to musk of Khotan. However, the sea route must be taken into consideration, as musk was also brought from the port of Daibul in India to the port of Siraf and along to the shores of the Persian Gulf to Mesopotamia. Now, our evidence tends to be reflecting the early Islamic period, but I wonder how much change would have taken place from the Sasanian to the post-Sasanian Islamic period. There also are other routes where musk made its way to the West, along with other commodities such as aloe wood, camphor, which I just mentioned, and other goods which Johannes Pfister Kapeler has recently discussed in his article, The Peaches to Samarkand. But what is known is that the Sasanian use of musk is well documented. The use is usually explained in relation to the empire's aristocratic class and their cosmopolitan taste. But we should also take note, although I have repeated this, but I want to emphasize it, that the use of musk as a fragrance, as an aromatic, was not solely for profane pleasures, but had a sacred function in late antique religious setting. Unlike the early Christian tradition, which has 2 sections, if you look at the use of course, fragrance in a Christian setting, but in the early Christian setting, stench was deemed a positive aspect for saints and holy men in late antique tradition. Only slowly there's a move away from this in Christianity. In fact, the injunction against incense burning and so on in early Christians is clear. For Zoroastrianism in late antiquity, this was indeed the opposite. The smell of decaying and stench in Zoroastrianism was in fact unholy and a sign of the evil spirits, hold, which had attacked the body along with its messenger, this evil messenger of death, Nasush, the demoness of that man. Hence, stench was deemed as the work of demons, and the absence of fragrance, boy, the world was deemed under attack by the evil spirits and its cohorts. So I just want to emphasize this religious worldview of dualism of the Iranian world and why it necessitated to have so much fragrance, boy, be imported to it and its production. Thus, the interest in musk was important for Zoroastrian practices, not only for material luxury, but as I mentioned, religious purposes. Musk and how it was used and thought of in the Zoroastrian tradition is indicated in several Zoroastrian texts, including the Bundahesh and the Book of Primal Creation, where at least two terms, mushke or musk of nafak and mushke siyah, are mentioned, although in a curious section. Here we are faced with mushke nafak in Middle Persian, the musk of navel, and mushke siyah, black musk, as the two that are of importance. In fact, Persian dictionaries of later period, such as Farhang Nafisi, have a number of different musks that are mentioned and are distinguished specifically from one another based on their quality and the manner in which they're extracted. These are, as you can see the list here, at least I put three of them: Mushke Tatari, the Tatar musk; Mushke Tabat, the musk of Tibet; and Mushke Nafe, which is mentioned in the Bundeshen and what is considered to be pure musk. The Mushke Nafe is also said to come from Khotan. So there is now a distinguishing factor between the Tibet musk and the Khotanese musk. So I think that there are two different here settings that we're talking about in terms of its production. It is this musk which might have been sought and used and prized for religious ceremonies. The use of musk in the religious realm in Sasanian Iran receives both direct and indirect notices. In the Middle Persian Zoroastrian text, another one called Vizadagi Ha-Izad Spram, which you can see a passage from it, is the clear source for the importance of musk, along with other aromatics in Zoroastrian tradition. In a section, there's a discussion of the return of the righteous on earth, but not in the state when they passed away. But it's really interesting. It says, but they're beautiful with bright bones, their blood in their veins as if sweet and fragrance, as red wine in a crystal container. And the text continues. And their humor in the body is more fragrant than musk and amber and camphor. I think these are the three important boys of late antique Iran: mushk, ambar, and kafur, which we encounter much in Middle Persian literature, including, of course, classical Persian tradition, whose height and shortness is measured in the measure of Gayumat, in the stature of nature, in the manner of 40 years of age. This is the ideal age for the body. Then musk was used in what has been called a devotional aid. And that is, I think, something that should be important, as mentioned by Susan Harvey in her work on the use of fragrance and scent in Christianity. And that a great portion indeed was used in Iran. But even more significant is the report by Chinese sources that Iranians anointed their beards with musk during worship. We do not find such testimonies from the Iranian sources, but it's interesting that, again, going further back now, Theophrastus tells us that the importance of perfume at the court of the Achaemenid Persian king, the last of them, Darius III, who, it's stated, had 14 perfumers and 46 garland makers. More impressively, we read in the book of Esther, a young woman who would come to the king Xerxes at Susa at night had to go through a ritual of being perfumed, where the text reads, and when each maiden's turn arrived to go to King Ahasuerus or Xerxes, after having been treated according to the practices prescribed for women, for 12 months. For so were the days of their ointments completed, 6 months with myrrh oil and 6 months with perfumes, and with ointments of the women, which I know not what that is. Thus, the Chinese, classical, and biblical sources inform us that the Iranian world was somehow obsessed with perfume and smelling fragrantly. But most probably these authors were unaware as of the Zoroastrian underpinning of this worldview of the boy and its fragrance. In fact, the biblical tale gives us a hint of Iranian olfactory, which may be exaggerated. But the sense of this passage does associate the perfume in its ancient Iranian context. However, the book of Esther and its dating and its context is a matter of course, discussion among scholars. Let me go to jasmine. And the jasmine section is much shorter. Jasmine. On the other hand, in Iran, there were a host of plants, perfumes, and spices which made their way to China. The one Iranian perfume whose plant seems to have made its way to the East is jasmine. Today, jasmine is a well-known commodity in China, where jasmine tea is consumed, of course, and important. However, this plant appears to not have been native to China, or there may have been two different, one an Iranian one and a Chinese one. But this jasmine probably reached, as most sources mentioned to us, and secondary that I've looked at, came as early as the late Han period to Iran, which perhaps is part of Professor von Qedem's project. Two matters makes this clear. First is the preponderance of different jasmines which were used in Sasanian Iran based on Middle Persian sources. For example, the text here, Khosrow Ridak, Khosrow on the page, it's about the good life and all the beauties. There's a section on different perfumes and their qualities. And they're associated with class, religion, and life. And it is a long list. We find a host of mentions of flowers and plants. Here, Middle Persian Saman Speed and Saman Zard are mentioned as the wonderful fragrances, boys. However, the text emphasizes that jasmine should not be used or associated with prostitutes, speak. This caution makes it relatively clear that the oil which was extracted from jasmine and used as perfume was well known, and indeed all classes of women used it. Here we find the common ground between Christianity and Zoroastrianism, where fragrance is deemed dangerous when used by courtesans. The evidence for jasmine being traded on the Silk Road from Iran to the East is given by Chinese sources. Since the texts at our disposal are as early as the Tang period, there's a debate as to the date when jasmine was introduced, but the plant having come from Iran is rarely doubted. Kaihan, the minister of the Chinese Emperor Hui, at the end of the beginning of the 4th century, compiled a text on botany and called the plant Yesimin, which must be derived from Persian Saman. I think that makes it is quite clear. How jasmine and its oil reached China is also important, and it was mainly known to have grown in the province of Fars in Persis. So we're talking about, if I can get my pointer back here, we're talking about this area. Hence, the sea route was important, where jasmine and its oil moved via the Persian Gulf and ultimately arrived at the ports of Canton in China. But not all commodities from the Iranian world reached via the sea, such as exotic trees, plants, and fruits, such as olives, figs, myrtle, and other commodities. In the context of jasmine, Dun Xianxi, in his book on the 18th chapter, which I dare not repeat its title, states that Yehimi, or jasmine, grows in the country of Fulin and also in the country of Persia, Posu. The plant has a height of 7 or 8 chi. Its leaves seem to be like those of plum. It grows luxuriantly all year round. Its flowers are white and 5 petals. It has not seed. When it blooms, the air of the fields will be heavy with the aroma of its flowers, somewhat like the zhangtang that grows in the district of Liaoning. The inhabitants of the Western countries usually pick its flowers to extract the oil, which is very fragrant and creamy. Of course, having said all of this between the mustard, east and west, and the jasmine, by now you must be wondering, so what is the point of this talk on trade in aromatics between Iran and China? What I would like to emphasize actually here is that Sasanian Iran Shah was not simply an empty oasis with a road running through it where only Rome and China produced and engaged in trade of goods and commodities. The Sasanian world itself was also a center of production when in the royal, for example, cities, expert workmen created luxury items such as you're seeing here of these plates with their guild masters, Karak Bet, and controlled its qualities. For example, Sasanian glass was exported to a large area, including Yemen and Arabia, and also Caucasus in Armenia, as well as Central Asia, and made its way all the way to the east. Sasanian taste for good life and its commodities was well known and certainly desired on the Silk Road. As my colleague here at UC Irvine, Matthew Canepa, has stated, this is attested to in the broad Eurasian spread of Sasanian artistic and political material, such as silver, wine, services, silk, textile, or textile ornaments, and architectural ornaments, whose popularity endured for centuries thereafter. I would like to emphasize that jasmine was only an example of luxury which left Iran to the east and to the rest of the world. Earlier scholars such as Bernard Laufer, Edward Schaeffer were the early scholars who studied the importance of commodities which came to China from Iran. What is of note is that more recently, at least according to my perspective, the place of the Iranian world in this long distance trade and production in what we call the Silk Road has been somewhat downgraded. In modern Silk Road studies, with the exclusion of course, a number of works, present company, of course, excluded. I mean, you can read Peter Frankopan's, of course, book on the Silk Road, which is really richly documented. So I'm not talking about these people, or Nicola Di Cosmo, Moss, and Susan Whitefield, and Judith Lerner, excluding these people. So I'm not, making a blanket accusation here. But excluding these scholars that I mentioned, Iran is simply seen, usually in Silk Road studies, as a desert highway, where Chinese commodities move from the east through and reach through this sort of barren land to its logical destination, right? Namely that of the Roman Empire and the Mediterranean. It's the two orbits of production and consumption and powers that are usually mentioned in Silk Road studies. And in the middle, there are people who are happily on their back-turned camels come and sell the commodities in these desert oases, and they just gently go to where the money and power is. Today, it seems that on the Silk Road, Iran is seen only as a bridge, and even the various cities and centers of production in Iran are being missed. In fact, this new view goes against the face of I think, previous studies, which demonstrates the importance of Iranian products as measures of luxury or means of luxury, which were spread throughout Afro-Eurasia in competition with Rome and China. So I'm not saying Iran is it. I'm just saying it's one of the hubs that are actually being missed. One has to reconcile such disparity in scholarship about Silk Road. I would hazard a guess that modern politics has an effect on Silk Road studies. So has an effect, and that is something that we can discuss. We have not even discussed, of course, the sea trade really in the Persian Gulf quite adequately here. But the evidence, of course, is compelling of the influence of the ports and the commodities that went to and through it. It is clear that the heavy and breakable commodities, the sea route obviously is much more conducive for such trade than the land route. Hence, other types of commodities from Iran left not only China and East Asia, but through Indian Ocean and Arabia and Africa. Laufer, many years ago, of course, in his Golden Peaches of Samarkand, has discussed that in Fars, in the province of Persis, Daryaee and Shiraz were major production of jasmine. More recently, Kerman has been pointed out. And of course, this was just not for its fragrance use as jasmine oil. If you look at its medical use, a recent article by Ying Hu, History of Introduction of Exotic Elements into Traditional Chinese Medicine, from about 3 decades ago, that's what I call recent, has pointed out to the importance of jasmine. This is clear from a recent blog by C.R. Green as well, who has mapped out Sasanian finds all the way to Britain, Africa, and Japan. In fact, one can state that it was a Sasanian empire to a large extent, not completely, which stimulated the Silk Road trade in late antiquity due to its production and the facilitating of trade. Thus, Iran should, or the Iranian world or Iran shadow, the Sasanians should not be ignored as a center of production between the great Roman Empire and, of course, the great Chinese world, especially in terms of history of aromatics. This is the end of my talk, basically, but if you allow me, I would just like to show you 2 more slides, because maps, as I've been going through and trying to pick and choose, can be indeed misleading. And this is the problem that we just talked about, this map, which is just a straight line. Obviously, it has different functions, but what we see this already, a precursor to the Silk Road, is the Achaemenid Royal Road, which Pierre Briand already has discussed succinctly, that many times we just see this road coming from Susa going westward to Sardis, as if the entire attention and preoccupation of the Achaemenid Persian Empire was the Mediterranean and the West. In reality, when you look at the Persepolis fortification tablets, you see a much more complex area of trade, and the Royal Road is much more crisscrossing to the East, Central Asia, and India than what we just this singular Western contention that we have. And Henry Colburn has also talked about this communication. So the same goes, I think, with using maps for the Silk Road. You could have this one road going from China to Mediterranean and coming back. But of course, you could have a bit more complex maps. I'm not saying this is the best one, but it certainly is much more complicated. And although even the names are misnomer, nobody was going to Persepolis in 400 AD for trade, perhaps, or what is called Ekbatana, which would have been Hamadan. So I think map making and sort of how we project things on map also need to be considered. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you, Dr. Daryaee, for your engaging talk. If everybody is okay, we will do the Q&A at the end, so that we have some time. So I shall again thank you, Dr. Daryaee, for the very stimulating talk. Everybody is showing this clap. Okay, so our second speaker is Dr. Arash Reisinezhad. He's the assistant professor of international relations at Tehran University, Faculty of Law and Political Science. Among his book publications are a book that it's very interesting for me personally. It's called The Shah of Iran, the Iraqi Kurds and the Lebanese Shia, published in 2018 by Palgrave Macmillan. And he's also written a lot on the ontological security and national security of Iran in the current atmosphere. And actually, me and Dr. Reisinezhad have been long friends since our bachelor degrees times from Sharif University. So when I was aspiring to be a mathematician and he was aspiring to be an engineer. So fortunately, we didn't pursue those paths. But thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Reisinezhad. I give the virtual floor to you, please.
Okay. I think I cannot share my
Sorry,
screen.
I have to make you a co-host. Hang on. I just have to find you. Here we are. Someone has prevented me from from acting on Dr. Reisinezhad. Someone has silenced everybody. I mean, did you do that?
Let me see. I'm sorry, I'm very new to this.
Now it's possible. No problem. It's fine. Okay. Now that Dr. Reisinezhad,
Well,
you
Sita,
should be.
No, I
you
mean,
needed his brother a co-host.
you made a mistake. My name is Arash, A-R-A-S-H, not my brother. My
All right,
twin
I'm
brother.
sorry, Arash.
It's okay.
Sorry. So yeah, but still, you can now open your, share your screen.
Nope, I cannot, unfortunately.
No, I think Arsham Reisinezhad is the co-host, not Arash Raisi.
Okay. I think
Now,
nothing happened.
Right.
Yeah, I have a brother.
Nice.
Okay.
Now I understand the problem. I thought.
Okay. So now I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Sorry about.
Okay.
Glitch.
Right, okay. Hello, everybody. I hope all is good, especially in the middle of the notorious pandemic of COVID-19. It's my honor and pleasure to be with you and to participate in this event. I should express my appreciation for University of Freiburg and Professor von Redden, and of course, Dr. Nayapur and two brilliant students, Farshad Aded and Ali Hassan. Well, tonight I don't want to focus on merely on an ancient Silk Road, neither the new Silk Road, which is kind of a little bit my expertise. I should confess that I'm not as expert as Dr. Daryaee in Iran's history, especially under the Sassanid era. Rather, I try to make connection between the ancient Silk Road and the new Silk Road by arguing that the ancient Silk Road had specific features and patterns that are still durable and vivid, as such that any rise of the Silk Road under the name of the New Silk Road, One Belt, One Road, or Belt and Road Initiative will follow the same logic and pattern. So I go back and forth from the New Silk Road to the ancient Silk Road and vice versa. So everybody, I think, knows about the New Silk Road. In September 2013, President Xi Jinping announced the New Silk Road, the Silk Road Economic Belt in Kazakhstan. A month later, he went to Jakarta in Indonesia and announced the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. And then the notion of the New Silk Road was highlighted in the eve of Iran-China 25-year cooperation program. This New Silk Road is constituted, or is supposed to be constituted, of two major routes: land-based belt and maritime road. So the belt is supposed to comprise of 6 major corridors. And tonight, I want just to focus on the third number, a corridor that connects Iran to China via through Central Asia and crossing Iran to Turkey or to Levant and then to the Europe. But there is a history behind the New Silk Road, which is called, of course, the ancient Silk Road. And these are my main arguments. The Silk Road, again, had specific features. They are durable and vivid. In both roads, China functioned and will function as the key player. And I think, in contrast to many arguments and explanation, the land-based belt will be more and more important, just because of the power competition in international level between China and the US. And finally, Iran acted and functioned as a center of gravity of the ancient Silk Road and will function the same role in a new Silk Road. But why Iran? If you take a look at Iran's history, especially after the demise of Persian Achaemenid or Hahamanechian, you could see a kind of durable pattern for Iran's domestic politics and foreign policy, oscillation between territorial destruction and military encirclement. Just take a look at the Parthian Arsacids or Ashkanian. The country at the time was surrounded by the Kushan Empire in the east, and then Roman Empire on the west. And sequential wars, especially with the Roman legion, that weakened the country and left the country prone to the domestic challenge, as such that the Persian Sassanid came up and overthrew the Parthian Arsacids. And then we have the same pattern for Sassanid too. Iran under the Sassanid was surrounded again by the Huns, the Heptals, and then the Turks on the east, and Roman, and then the Byzantine Empire on the west. And I think the encirclement, the military encirclement of Iran got harsher because in many occasions and instances, there was a kind of pseudo-alliance between the Byzantine Empire and the Turks to attack the country simultaneously. So these wars, weakened the country, and Iran couldn't defend its national security and territorial integrity on the eve of the Arab-Muslim invasion, and the Arabs, of course, destroyed the country savagely. So the same pattern could be found under Iran during the Safavid era, when Ottoman Empire on the west and Uzbek Khanate and Great Mughal in India surrounded the country. So the only difference between Safavid and the Sassanid era was in Safavid era, we have both geopolitical power competition and geopolitical Shia-Sunni competition. And then we have Qajar. So under the Safavid, the country got weakened as such that Sunni Afghans came up and conquered the country. Same pattern was vivid for the Qajar. When the country was encircled by the Tsarist Russia on the north and the British in south. And now in a modern era, when in Cold War, Iran was encircled again by the Soviet and its allies, and now by the US military bases and allies. So this military encirclement was accompanied by sequential territorial destruction of the Macedonian, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, Tatars, Afghans, and finally, the allies. So if you take a look at the history of Iran, again, from the demise of the Persian Achaemenid, you could see that there are only two exceptions within which Iran could present its regional superiority. Very short, in a very short period of time, under the Khosrow II, Khosrow Aparviz, and Nader Shah, the Afshar, while with the destructive consequence as such that after Khosrow II, the country fell in a pitfall of this insecurity and disorder. Same pattern came up after the assassination of Nader Shah. So if we want to find final reasons behind the durability and continuity of this, destiny, notorious destiny for Iran, oscillation between military encirclement and territorial destruction, we should focus on geopolitical features. So Iran is located at a geostrategic location in the middle of Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf. No matter who rules Iran, it's in a critical juncture of three continents of Asia, Europe, and Africa. And the country, unfortunately, lacked a kind of defensive natural borders. If you compare Iran with, for instance, with Britain, that is isolated from the rest of Europe by the sea, or with the US, that two vast oceans isolate the US from the rest of the world. So both Britain and US could power project on different parts of the world without reception of any existential threat. But Iran couldn't do that. That's why Iran was conquered many times, sequentially. And then Iran has been located close to the source of great powers, from the Roman Empire to Ottoman Empire to Tsarist Russia, British, United States of America, and Soviet Union. So this geopolitical feature, I think, has given birth to the notorious destiny of Iran oscillation between military encirclement and territorial destruction. However, I think we should inject and add another geoeconomic feature. Well, everybody talks about, for instance, oil or energy route as a kind of geoeconomic force in a modern era. But if we get back to the history, we could see that the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road, was a major geoeconomic force and context, both within which Iran acted. So, according to many documents, I mean, the seeds of ancient Silk Road was dated back to the Persian or Iranian royal road, firstly established by the Darius the Great. So in his 3 first years, Darius faced with different insurrections and disorders, rebellions in different provinces of his vast empire. So after crushing successfully all these insurrections, he came up with this idea that establishing a kind of road that crossed his vast empire could be beneficial. So again, the major intention behind Darius' decision, I think, was a kind of political and military issue. So that's why he built this road administrative system, which was at the time very new and path-breaking. But as international history shows us, there has been a kind of translation from political military network to economic network. So Darius came up with this decision, with this idea to facilitate the central government's power projection in different parts of the Persian Empire. But it changed, I mean, it translated to the economic trade network. On one side, this transformation gave the Persian economy, revenues for helping the country to extend its military campaigns. But on other side, it made Iran an attractive target for different foreigners, especially Alexander the Macedonian. And this pattern repeated many times in Iran's history. So Alexander continued the same pattern by building a network of Greek colonies in Central Asia and modern Afghanistan. And then we have a kind of a stretching of and transformation of the royal road to the ancient Silk Road. This situation, I mean, this transformation was coincided with the rise of China, the rise of United China, especially during the Han Dynasty. And we know about a growing ambition of Emperor Wudi, also known as Xi, very, very strange, Xi Jinping right now. And he, for the first time, left Chinese foreign policy, classic foreign policy, and try to power project, to extend Chinese power projection in a western part of China, called now as Xinjiang and previously called as Xiyu, and try to control Crossroads on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert and Kashgar. And he tried again to increase Chinese efforts to search for new markets. So again, his intention to support to defend Chinese national security by preventive and attacks and power projection in Xinjiang and Central Asia came up with the rise of the ancient Silk Road. So if you compare this pattern to the new Silk Road right now in the contemporary era as a kind of mega project in Chinese grand strategy. So just take a look at what happened under the Obama administration. He crafted, a strategy called the pivot to Asia to surround China by not only building Trans-Pacific Partnership, but also by constructing a new Silk Road initiative that unfortunately nobody pointed to the issue. The plan of NSRI was firstly recommended by Frederick S. Starr, aiming to connecting Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent by passing Afghanistan. So bypassing China, Russia, and Iran. So as a response to the Obama's administration, just like what Emperor Woody did that, China came up with the idea, also known as pivot to the West. By West here, I don't mean ideological West, but geographical West. So the rise of China, its so-called defensive intention finally came up with the rise of the new Silk Road. Same intention, same pattern. Again, trade expansion, securing energy routes, and stabilization of Xinjiang and connecting to the Central Asia. Again, for both the ancient Silk Road and the new Silk Road, Xinjiang or Eastern Turkestan and Central Asia are important, have been important. So on an ancient era, the Han Dynasty tried to control Jihu to prevent attacks and invasion of the nomadic tribes to China. Same situation for modern China to crush, radicalism according to the Chinese and separatist movements. So at the time, in ancient era, Central Asia was called as a kind of bridge of the ancient Silk Road. Now it's called it functions as a new Eurasian bridge in a new Silk Road. So by showing this issue, I try to give you that the patterns of ancient Silk Road is still vivid. Now we could see that there's a kind of stability in Central Asia. Just what happened in ancient era. In ancient era, Central Asia was like a function as a double-edged sword. As a source of security, as such, the ancient Silk Road got prosperous, while at the time, the source of insecurity, as such, the ancient Silk Road, the land-based ancient Silk Road, got disrupted. Same situation right now in Central Asia. There's a seemingly, apparently, security and stability in a region in Central Asia. However, there could be a kind of competition between Moscow and Beijing. And I think what lurked beneath the stability of Central Asia now is competition between these two great powers. Well, of course, in a contemporary era with all the US pressure on both Moscow and Beijing, there wouldn't be any strategy, kind of tension between these two countries. But without this pressure, you could see a kind of tension between China and Russia on different projects related to Belt and Road Initiative or Eurasian economic unity. Not only Central Asia, but we should focus on a Western Asia, on an ancient Silk Road. There was a kind of geoeconomic competition between Rome and then Byzantine Empire against Iran under the Parthian Arsacids and the Sassanid, the Persian Sassanid. Well, under the Parthian Arsacids, or Ashkanian, right? I think the majority of Shahs of Iran, the Parthian Shahs, didn't have any kind of strategic vision towards economic trade routes. However, when Ardashir I, Ardashir Babakan, came up, overthrew the Parthian kingdom, and founded the Persian Sassanid, he tried to control economic trade route. Just according to Tabari, for instance, he built like 11 new cities out of 16 new cities he founded. So, on a port, as a port on the shore of the Persian Gulf. So, exaggerated or not, it gives you a pulse that Ardashir and the Persian Sassanid Shah had a kind of strategic vision towards, controlling economic road. And that's why the geoeconomic power competition under the Sassanid got intensified in comparing to the Parthian Arsacids. So that's why we have patterns of war, alliance, bypass policy, and economic cooperation. If you focus on wars between two great powers in Western Asia, between Romans and Iranians, you could see that Fertile Crescent, right now constituted of modern Iraq and Syria, was a center of major wars. So I always, mentioned in my books and articles that Fertile Crescent is a kind of heartland of the West Asia. In Halford Mackinder terminology, we should reframe this sentence and announce that who rules Fertile Crescent commands the Middle East. But along with this heartland, we have Caucasia and Yemen as rimlands of these, encircling this heartland. So if you take a look at ancient wars between Rome and Iran, and then Byzantine, Sassanid, you could see the geographical location of these wars. And right now, the patterns are vivid. Major tension in Iraq, Syria, Karabakh, and Yemen. Not only wars, we should, compare alliance policy on a Silk Road, on an ancient Silk Road and new Silk Road both. So under the Sassanid, we have different instances within which, the Byzantine emperor tried to convince the Turk Khagan or Khans to invade the country simultaneously. Same pattern was vivid under the Safavid and then during Iran's history. And then we have a kind of bypass policy. Well, under the ancient Silk Road, the Byzantine and before that, the Roman tried to bypass Iran's territory because they knew that the Iranian Shahs, the Persian and Parthian Shahs controlled economic trade network. So they tried to build a route. If you take a look at the map, the light green line shows you this route. They tried to build a kind of Silk Road route in the middle of steppes on the north of the Caspian Sea, modern Georgia and north part of Black Sea to reach China as an economic center of the ancient Silk Road. So if you check, if you read different peace agreements between Persians and Byzantine in 298, when Duke defeated Narseh, the Shah of Iran, and then when Shapur II got revenge of his grandfather's defeat and imposed many defeats over the Byzantine Empire. And then 50 years of peace between Khosrow I, Sassanid, and Justinianus, you could see different clauses related to Iberia, in modern Georgia, in Lazica, in a western part of Georgia, all aiming to control this route of, the ancient Silk Road. The policy, the bypass policy, is now still vivid. The new bypass policy on a new Silk Road. So just take a look at, these two photos. As I mentioned earlier, the land-based belt is constituted of 6 major corridors. And the most important corridor, which overlaps with the ancient Silk Road, is the corridor that connects China to Central Asia and to the West Asia. But it has not been fully implemented, right? So the countries like Turkey right now try to act, to frame itself as a Chinese favorite player in a Western Asia on a new Silk Road. So on the right photo, we have the middle corridor, a corridor that connects China to Kazakhstan, and then through passing two Kazakh ports of Kurik and Aktau, past the Caspian Sea to Baku in Azerbaijan, to Tbilisi and Kars. Another, the left photo shows you the Caspian corridor, connects China to Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and then through passing Turkmenbashi, port of Turkmenbashi, to Baku, Tbilisi, and then Kars to Istanbul. Again, Turkey is trying to bypass Iran and introduce itself as a Chinese favorite player in West Asia. In Turkmenbashi, Turkish company of Chalhik has massively invested to build a new modern port. So the combination of the Caspian corridor and the middle corridor could be mentioned, could be named as a Turkey's Bayram belt. On a left photo, you could see. So the eastern part of the Turkey's Bayram belt, right, is constituted of these two corridors, the Caspian corridor and the middle corridor. But the western part, both should cross Baku, Tbilisi, and Kars, Turkey. So you could analyze the recent Karabakh war from this angle. Turkey's effort to introduce itself as a major favorite key player in China, in its new Silk Road, through bypassing Iran. Not only land-based routes on an ancient Silk Road, we should focus on a maritime Silk Road, both during the ancient era and in the modern era. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the Sassanid had a kind of strategic vision in controlling ports and economic choke points to put pressure on his Western neighbor, Byzantine Empire, and before that, the Roman Empire. At the time, Hormuz was a kind of critical juncture that connected both the land-based ancient Silk Road and maritime ancient Silk Road. Now, according to the new Silk Road, the only port that is functioning as a kind of critical juncture connecting the new land-based belt and new maritime Silk Road is water. But I think just because of the strength and durability of patterns of the ancient Silk Road, this situation will be transformed, and Chabahar will be the major critical juncture. And the 25-year agreement heralds one other element for proving my argument is that Chabahar, just like Hormuz, connected Iran not only to China but to the India. Why India? So there have been a bunch of articles arguing about the Chinese maritime Silk Road. I mean, the new Silk Road. All of these articles, refers to the geopolitical concept is called as a string of pearls that refers to the network of Chinese military base and ports on the shore of the Indian Ocean. The right photo could show the string of pearls that encircling and surrounding Indian subcontinent and limiting Indian power projection in the Indian Ocean. So if you talk to all Indian strategists, string of pearls, Chinese string of pearls, it's a kind of insult. I mean, that's why Delhi now has come up with a new strategy called Ma'osam. So Ma'osam aims to transform the Indian Ocean as an Indian world from Madagascar to Indonesia. And the initial plans for Indian Ma'osam has been predicated on two major corridors. The Kaladan corridor, the Kaladan road that connects Calcutta to Sitwe, a strategic port on Myanmar. So it's really amazing that Myanmar, or previous Burma, right, has two major ports. One is Geoeconomics that has been donated to China. I mean, China has been investing on a port, and the other port, Sitwe, has been for India. So what's happening in Myanmar right now should not be analyzed just as a kind of domestic power competition between two power blocks, but I think a kind of competition between the Chinese maritime Silk Road and an Indian Ma'osam, and that could be manifested in a competition between two ports of Sitwe and Kyaukpiao. The eastern part, the western, part of Indian Ma'osam is called as a Cotton Road, with aiming to connect Mumbai to Chabahar, to Afghanistan and Central Asia, again to limit Chinese influence in Central Asia, and of course in the new Silk Road. So the power project in maritime Silk Road, on an ancient Silk Road and new Silk Road, will definitely give Iran a power projection ability. If you take a look at maritime history of Iran, you could see that Iran was not a major player in the Indian Ocean. The major route in Indian Ocean, the power networks and the economic networks acted in an eastern-western direction. However, just under in a short period of time, Iran could disrupt this eastern-western direction and control it in a kind of northern-southern direction. Under Khosrow Anushiravan, when he successfully conquered Yemen to block maritime trade networks of the Byzantine, backed by Ethiopia or Habasha, and then under the Shah Abbas the Great, the most famous Safavid king, who backed Omani naval force and Sultanate of Muscat to crush Portuguese in a southern part of Iran, in Eastern Africa, in Mombasa, and on a Western India. So this power projection mentality is, I think, rising. I'm not sure if Iranian strategists are fully aware of the situation, but Iran's presence in Yemen could be the first step for the revival of this maritime power projection imposed by Iran. So Iran came, Iran conquered Yemen under the Khosrow II, Khosrow Anushirvan, and controlled the country for half of centuries. Then in 1961, Iran intervened in Yemen, in northern Yemen, when the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he supported the royalist groups, the royalist, Imam Badr, who was really Shia Houthi Zaidi, just like the modern Houthi. To support this guy, this prince, against the forces backed by Saddam and Jamal Abdel Nasser. At the time, Saudi Arabia joined both the Shia Houthi Zaydis and Iran. Now, the country, the Riyadh has transferred, its position. And then since 2004, Iran's presence in Yemen has been revived. One element for Yemen is the geostrategic location of Socotra archipelago. So if you focus on a late history of Iran's Sassanid, you could see that under Khosrow I, he successfully, under the general Vahran, I think, he successfully conquered Socotra, and Socotra has functioned as a gateway of the Western Indian Ocean. So I think after the termination of Yemeni crisis, major Iranians would think about the geostrategic location of Socotra to revive its power projection in the Western Indian Ocean, because Indian Ocean would be the center of power competition, economic competition in the upcoming decades. And the last part of my speech is about kind of Iranian-Chinese strategic partnership, not now, but on an ancient Silk Road. As we know, Yazdegerd III, the last Shah of Sassanid, after his sequential defeat of the Arab Muslims, he dispatched his son, Piruz, and then maybe Bahram Barjavand, to Emperor Gaozong of Tang. Professor Daryaee has a brilliant article about this issue, but I always ask myself, why Yazdegerd dispatched his son to China, not to other countries? I think Iran at the time, on an ancient Silk Road, was a kind of Chinese ally, or at least a strategic partner, because Iran could support and help Chinese to control stabilizing forces in Central Asia as a bridge of the ancient Silk Road. And the same vision will revive. Iran acted on an ancient Silk Road as a last defensive castle that prevented, the nomadic tribes' invasion towards China. And just take a look at modern map right now, from Istanbul to Urumqi in Xinjiang. You could see that without Iran, right, all these vast lands have potential for the rise of two geocultural and ideological force of Pan-Turkism and Wahhabism. I mean, this vast land is part of Turkic Sunni world. So Iran has functioned as a kind of last castle, last defensive castle, preventing the Western encirclement of China. And the same vision is reviving for the majority of Chinese strategies. And then we should focus on a new Silk Road and the future of this issue. And then I can get back to the ancient Silk Road again. So we know about, the Biden administration, by his multilateral containment of China. So there's a kind of slight difference between Trump administration and Biden's administration. And President Biden tries to strengthen Quad, comprised of US, India, Japan, and Australia, and build a kind of Quad plus. I always, argue in different talks and speech that the US policy towards the new Silk Road would be leave the belt and press the road, which means that the US will put pressure, increase its pressure on the Chinese maritime Silk Road, while it is unable to put pressure on a land-based belt. So this means that, in contrast to major arguments provided by different strategies, I think belt will get more and more important. And in this context, Iran would be more important because of its geostrategic location. So Iran is the only route that gives, that could give China a strategic access to the vast energy sources in a Persian Gulf. Remember that 80% of energy required by China pass the Strait of Malacca, and 40% pass Strait of Hormuz. And the US, in a kind of critical juncture, could block these two strategic choke points. But with Iran, with the geostrategic location of Iran, China could reach this vast source of energy by crossing Central Asia to Iran. So nowadays, China is trying to maintain its kind of delicate balance among different powers in the Middle East, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, and GCC. But just because of the US pressure, Iran, the relation with China will get more, with Iran will get more and more strategic in comparing to other, powers in Western Asia. So it gives Iran, it makes Iran, I think, a kind of transit hub of the region by making balance among the New Silk Road, the Chinese New Silk Road, the Indian Mausam, and the Russian and Northern European International North-South Transportation Corridor, which gives the a kind of general deterrence. So this situation gives Iran a kind of strategic opportunity by giving the country a general deterrence, while at the same time made the country a strategic target for power competition, just what happened on an ancient Silk Road, because ancient Silk Road, gave Iran a strategic opportunity by providing revenues for Iranian shahs of parts, Arsasid and Sassanid to invest on their military campaigns, while on the other side made the country a kind of attractive targets for different foreigners and strangers, from the Macedonians to Arabs to Turks, Mongols, and Tatars. So my point is that Iran's royal road gave birth to the ancient Silk Road, while the new Silk Road has a potential to give Iran a kind of new road diplomacy. And this slide wraps up my my argument that the Silk Road as a kind of major manifestation of geopolitical and geoeconomic context and force have, had specific features that are still vivid and durable, as such that the new Silk Road could not escape from it. And by saying this, I'm done, and I hope you liked my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Reisinezhad, for your simulating talk. If you may stop the sharing of your screen, we can go on to start the Q&A. No, you just have to stop the the sharing of your screen. Yes.
Okay, all right. I don't know how.
You just see at the top of your screen a green bar. Yeah, there we are.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so I will take the questions. The first question from Mr. Mohammed Humayun Vash. Please.
Thank you. Thank you both for great presentations. I really enjoyed it. I have a kind of a macro level question, maybe for Dr. Reisinezhad, about maybe an alternative route that could long-term really be detrimental for the Silk Road. And that is the Russia's Northern Sea route, along the Russia's Pacific seaboard, and then Russia's Arctic seaboard. And what it would do, because by some accounts, by 2030, it's going to be navigable, at least, from July to October. And by 2050, I think we're going to have 5 or 6 ice-free ports along that route. And I was looking at some numbers. So if you were to take, for example, if you're China and you want to take, goods, commodities from Shanghai to Hamburg, that route, that Northern Sea route, cuts, I think, distance by about 30%, and it will essentially make the Suez Canal much less geostrategically important. And if you're if you're China, you won't have to deal with the Taiwan Strait, with the Malacca Strait, over which the United States, as you said, has that chokehold. So is it a macro level, long-term maybe scenario that could really impact negatively this entire talk about, Belt and Road Initiative and so forth? And I also noticed that the Chinese are overhyping this project, but really underspending on that, especially in Central Asia and the Balkans. So there's a lot of buzzwords and a lot of hype built around it. But the Chinese are under-delivering, maybe having that, that long-term view that could be Russia's really trump card in perspective. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll give you a kind of short response. Well, of course, the new Silk Road is constituted of 2 major routes of, the maritime Silk Road in Indian Ocean, and then the land-based belt. Well, this Chinese strategy, especially Wang Jiechi, which is called as Chinese Kissinger, and Wang Yiwei, they pointed to the ice Silk Route. Connecting China to the Northern European by passing, Russia and Antarctica, of course. But here, there is a kind of issue. And it's, the destination, the final destination of the ice Silk Road. So with the Biden administration, I think the EU will not express its enthusiastic for extending trades with China. So the ice Silk Road will have a kind of ambiguous destination, the European. So that's why, despite all the efforts by Chinese and Russians to reach the Europe through the through the Antarctica, through the Northern Pole, it wouldn't be implemented fully, at least in comparing to the maritime New Silk Road and the land-based belts.
Okay, thank you. The next hand was from Mr. Mehdi, please.
Thank you. I have a quick question for Dr. Daryaee. You mentioned that mistakenly the Sasanian Iran has been only known as a bridge. My question is, why is this perception exist about Sasanian? And my second question is, if so, what are some examples of Sasanian's production or quote unquote industrial agricultural centers?
My actually mention in the context of Sasanian Iran was actually the Iranian plateau itself. That is, in the larger scheme of things, when there is this Silk Road studies, since this Iranian world is bridged between the two orbits of power, which gets most attention, especially, of course, these days for China, and of course, the Roman Empire traditionally, just the sheer number of scholars working on the two orbits, as opposed to the Iranian plateau, has mitigated the sort of the importance, as they are important, of China and the Mediterranean world. But because of, again, less people working on the Iranian world, the problem of archaeological excavations, which the reports get here far less, Iran seems to be, and the Sasanians itself, tend to get less attention. In terms of luxury, now there is much work that has been done by Matthew Canepa and others in terms of what is produced as luxury and how it actually placing Sasanian Empire within this sort of this global context of China and Rome. So I'm not saying it's extra important, but it is not that there's only one city in Hamadan that the caravan comes in, this beautiful road that is sort of drawn for late antique Silk Road studies. They stop there, you know, there's a coffee shop, and then the rest of them go to Rome. That is obviously not how trade was done. It was much more localized probably, and it went from one place to another. We have distinct information on how Sasanians, for example, attempted to curb silk production in the Roman Empire, Byzantium, and how they actually sent their Christian Persian merchants through out East Asia to buy all the silk, and so to hold the silk in their hands, even countering the Sogdians. When the Sogdians wanted to trade silk themselves and go through the Sasanian Empire, the Sasanians actually burnt. There's an episode that they burned the silk to show that it's the Sasanians who are going to control this trade. The same goes for early Sasanian period in Palmyra. When the Palmyrians come, as they had done in the Arsacid period, use the Persian Gulf, Kharaks, to go through the Persian Gulf to Oman, to India, and Far East, as the Arsacids allowed them. The Sasanians actually threw the gifts into the water, as we're told, because they were going to be now holding trade in their hands. They were just not going to be this road that people bypassed it. But in terms of local production, we have to go through these sources, either if they're Chinese, Middle Persian sources, and whatnot. I mean, some of these things are important for medicinal, economic, as well as luxury products. That was quite famous, and we see it remains East and West.
Okay, I saw a hand by Professor Frankopan. Please.
Thank you. So it's a rather specific question, Touraj, so excuse me for going into the details and the nitty-gritty. Could you say something about the traders who are moving musk around? I know from later sources and later periods about the role that Jewish traders in particular play. I don't know whether that's just a over-representation by the sources that we have, but could you tell us a little bit about what we do know, particularly from the Sasanian period, who's moving this around, and the distinctions that they make that you talked about the different kinds of musk,
Yeah.
Whether these are toponymic distinctions or whether it's related to the type of the musk animal itself, of which
Yeah,
there are different variations.
thank you for that
Thank you.
question, Peter, and thank you for being here. So the second question, I mean, the second part, it seems to be specific kind of production, right? The pure, just as the Sasanian sources talk about wine, clarified wine, unclarified wine, mixed water with wine. So the nafis seems to be the pure musk. And also there seems to be some idea that from where the musk is coming, there's a distinction. That is the Tibet, the musk that is coming from Tibet, the musk that is coming from Khotan, and the other, they all have a different grade, at least to them. Now, who is trading here when it gets to the Iranian plateau? As you've mentioned, it seems, and there's been this discussion of the religious communities within the empire, Sasanian Empire, and what Fry used to call this distaste of the Zoroastrian, let's say, elites for trade and traders in engaging in trade, where in fact we know that mainly whenever we hear about traders of silk, for example, they're Christian Persians, right? We don't hear much about the Zoroastrians, and that may be just because of the sources, as you mentioned, but the mention of Jews as traders in this empire and Christians, I think, signals at least partly that this idea of Fry that he came up, I think, in the 70s, that in fact it was religious communities who, the different non-Zoroastrian religious communities that engaged in this trade, although under the protection of the Sasanian Empire, makes sense. And this may have been also with the Manichaeans. I would assume, I don't know, but I'm thinking again, Manichaeans, Christians, and Jews, and not Zoroastrians actually engaging in such trade. And from the artifact of, let's say, the crosses of St. Thomas Cross as an example, to other crosses ending up in the East, in Middle Persian, it seems like it, that the material culture matches this textual idea of actually being the religious communities other than Zoroastrians who are engaging in trade.
Very kind. Thank you. Thank you. I could go on, but I don't want to steal. I mean, it's interesting, I think, about whether elite goods are being moved by minority communities, and in particular aromatics and things that have some form of, and like the jazz, some form of potentially religious significance or some elite significance. But that's a whole other story, I think, about whether the same minorities are moving all goods, yes, or whether it's just particular kinds. But we'll save that for another time. But thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor von Reden, please.
I think I saw Rodadat raising his hand previously. It is now down again, but I saw it. And that was before me.
Oh, my apologies. So please, Dr. Rezakhani, sorry I didn't see your...
Thank you, dear Sita. Sorry, I don't know how my hand was lowered. I have two quick questions. One of them is actually a continuation of Peter's question. And the other one is a comment and question for Dr. Raisi. Touraj, what are the routes that these various mosques produced in various regions are making it to Iran? Because I'm specifically thinking that the way that things from Khotan would come to Iran would be different than the ways that things would come from further east and what the Chinese consider as mosque. So do you find any, because that would relate to who is trading, because whether these are Chinese traders, local Tibetan and Khotanese traders, or communities like the Bactrians and Sogdians. So do we actually know about the routes? And I will ask my question to Dr. Raisi as well at the same time. I have to say that I have a lot of comments about your presentation of history of Iran in general and the militarization sort of that you had from the beginning. I think many of your what you said were actually ahistorical in actual application. But I was particularly interested in one thing that you said, that we have evidence of the Sasanian conquest of Socotra under Khosrow I. So I would appreciate if you tell me what that evidence is. Thank you very much.
So which should I answer the first? Khodajan, that's a good question. I am just guessing, as we don't know exactly how they're coming. But I've had a discussion with friends who do sort of trade, navigation, history of boats, and so on. And it's quite obvious that things that are breakable and of course heavy, ships tend to be much more economical in its trade. That is quite clear. And hence, when we find aromatics such as jasmine oil that are being mentioned exactly as where the ports of calls are for the empire, you know, you know this, when I wrote at this article once, the first things I did for Silk Road was in Journal of World History. The commentator on my paper said, obviously there was no inland to the ports any roadway, and this cannot be. Although I am much hesitant about this. So I think as in Fars, these aromatics of jasmine oil is being produced, or in Kerman. In fact, it's the ports that are able to take this from the ports, the ships are able to get it to Canton or take it to the east, while musk, which seems to be not a heavy commodity, right, is much more easily transferable. It's straight from, let's say, from Khotan and so on, over the, you know, the desert or under it through the round Silk Road to get to Khorasan and get to these other places. But that's my sort of guess of how it goes. Heavy sea route, light overland.
That makes sense. Thank you. You're muted.
Okay, thanks for your question, Professor Reza Khani. I mean, I read different articles about the Iranian influence in Socotra. The last article, I read was belonging to Sultan Biderman, and he pointed to the fact of the religion of major people living at the time in Socotra. The majority of them had a kind of Nestorian Christianity, which had a kind of alliance, with bishops in Tisfun under the Sasanian era. And there is no direct, documents, just according to some hypothesis. And there's an article by Topographia of Christiania, the third volume, page 65. He mentioned that the Nestorian Christian living in Socotra claimed that their bishop used to come from Tisfun, from Iran. So that's why I think Socotra at the time was conquered by Vahran, or maybe another Iranian Sasanian general.
Thank you very much. Just a quick follow-up. First of all, Vahrez, and then second, I really, since your main argument seems to be military-based, influences, I don't think the influences of Christian bishop, which yes, existed everywhere, including on the southern tip of India, really amounts to military conquest. So perhaps a more moderated version of the Sasanian influence in Socotra would be more accurate than sort of speculating an actual military conquest. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Professor von Reden, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not quite sure to whom this question is, but perhaps a little bit more to Dr. Reisinezhad. I wonder how your story changes if you give local populations a little bit more agency in your story. In both accounts, but particularly in yours, it was very much a story of China, Iran, Roman Empire, India, and so on, as if they were sort of nation states with a parliament that decides on certain issues, and then something happens, and there's a grand strategy of the Romans, trying to change the Silk Road via the steppe rather than via Central Asia and Iran. And I think I wonder whether today it's very different from the ancient world, where I think local agents, and I don't want to name them because they change a little bit in the Sasanian period than in our Greco-Roman period, if I may say so. But I think that in the steppe there were, loads of, the Xiongnu and the Yuezhi and people who actually were very active in this transfer, and the Romans were actually rather powerless acting upon these. And another part where you said Iran was actually not that active in the Indian Ocean. But if you look at the Gulf, I mean, since the archaic period, since Herodotus, there were very active trade networks in the Persian Gulf up to northern India, which were probably not directed by the Iranians sort of as a whole, whoever that was, but rather more local people in Bahrain, for example, and on coastal India. So this is a huge question, of course, but I wonder whether you see it differently today or similar. And that's a slightly rhetorical question, because I think sort of Central Asian states like Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and so on actually have a lot of agency in this question of the Belt Road Initiative, not so much in initiating it, but responding to it and so on. And then it becomes much less of a story of 5 empires or 5 nation states, but rather more of an immensely complex interaction of lots of local people.
So thanks for your question. Of course, I don't want to, make a complete similarity between what happened on the ancient Silk Road with the new Silk Road. But again, there are some features that that will repeat more and more, and this is very important for me, and that's why I try to explain about the issue. Of course, at the end, at the ancient era, there was no modern nation state with a power project, with a modern power project, and controlling different micro agents, of course. But when you want to narrate the history, grand narrative of history, you could focus on a macro level, not just micro one. So I try to, accomplish this mission by just focusing on a macro argument of the ancient Silk Road and the new Silk Road. Of course, Central Asia is important now. It's the most important region for the implementation of the new Silk Road. And it was really critical for the ancient Silk Road too. But again, I tried to bypass that region because there have been a bunch of articles and books about the issue, that region. I tried to, contribute to the literature by focusing of kind of geopolitical, geoeconomic power competition among Iran, Rome, Indian, Chinese, on ancient Silk Road, and the new Silk Road. But of course, it's not completely transparent. It's not unambiguous, and different arguments of micro level should be added to this narrative. It's an initial step.
Can I say something, Professor von Redden? I think our sockets have this brilliant, I sometimes think of it like a gel, that it has these, it's a commonwealth. In fact, it is not an empire as you would see it in the Sasanian period, but a commonwealth, which it has these principalities, especially in the Near East with Palmyra, these desert, let's say, in the Caucasus, where they work through dynastic connection, but also by having this Hargbet, for example, as we find in Palmyra and others, who have these business connections and economic connections rather than less of a military connection. With the Sasanian Empire, I think there is a turn that is starting with Ardashir. The idea that why the Romans see that the Sasanians are so aggressive in the Near East is to check the power of actually the Romans, who have steadily in the 2nd century and then in the 3rd have created provinces in the northern Mesopotamia, have taken Armenia, and the Kushans on the east have actually basically, I think, choked the Arsakid into sort of their decline. I tend to see that decline of the Arsakid because of the 2 orbits to their east and the west being encroaching on them, taking the Silk Road trade away from them, as well as in Mesopotamia. And so the Sasanians are much more, I think they begin to become centralized, and they're sending a signal both to ending the Kushans in the east in 225, and also taking it to Alexander in Severus and other Romans in the east, and then trying to take care of or control the Persian Gulf, as Ardashir has campaigns in the Persian Gulf region. I mean, there's a need, a reason to be given why he takes this action.
Thank you. That's very interesting, because then that's a very different, substantially different situation than in the 4th century. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question too, if I may. So one question for Dr. Daryaee, and I ask this as someone who completely ignorant about this Silk Road history. I'm curious about the economics of this trade. So what was the currency that they traded, and was there like a kind of a exchange rate or something, or did they just simply I don't know, exchange one commodity with another? So I'm just
in front of Professor Foghadin, who works on ancient economy, I am not the one to talk about at all. Peter, who has a chapter, of course, on the economy of the Silk Road. But in the Sasanian Empire, what we see, which is I think is interesting and comparable to the Roman world, is that when the Sasanian Empire is minting the mint locations under silver drams, which of course comes from the drachma, but it's the silver dram, it is an important, powerful international currency. As we find finds of hoards, especially in China and other places, this suggests not only sea trade, but also inland. And what is interesting with these mint marks gives us a sense, especially when we find it on the ports in China, they're mainly from the province of Fars and the south. But within the empire, when you have these finds of hoards, you find that there is a very good circulation of silver coinage. This is not the coinage that would have been the daily use, probably, because you would use actually pashiz, the copper, which also was produced. And so we know there's a monetary economy at work, right? Based on this and the specific weight system of dang. So the coins are circulating. In the Rome, I think what's spent, if I'm mistaken, and I may be mistaken, that the mints tend to, where the coins are found in the hoard, that are closer to the place where the mint is being struck. So it's less of an exchange of this coinage as opposed to the Iranian plateau and Mesopotamia, that is Sasanian Iran Shah, where there's a good circulation of monetary. And then we find, of course, the silver drams of the Sasanian, I think, as this recognized monetary system for both the East and the West. And of course, the Romans are doing their own.
Thank you. And I have a question for Dr. Reisinezhad. So I think it was last year in November, China made a deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was so-called the RCEP, basically between the Asian Pacific nations plus Japan, Australia, South Korea. And it's so basically it's really a maritime type of trade. What do you think it's that? What connection do you see with the Belt and Road Initiative and this current trade? Because this partnership is something like 30% of global GDP is covered under this partnership. And I mean, what intentions does China have? Honestly, let's put it roughly.
When the agreement emerged, it was welcomed by different, countries, and it seemed to herald a kind of new trade center in the Pacific Ocean. Remember that the agreement was signed on the eve of the final days of Donald Trump's presidency. But I think just because of the Biden administration's new policy, this agreement will not implement fully, because the US, by and large, put pressure on its allies to multilaterally contain China in both road, this maritime the location, and the land-based belt. So I think, again, the belt will get more and more important in contrast to the majority of arguments. And in this situation, Central Asia and to some degree, Iran will be more important just because of their geostrategic location.
Thank you. It seems that there's no more questions. Yep, I do not see any hands. Okay, so we shall wrap up this session. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to this session from all over the globe. I thank you again, Professor von Rheden, for your generosity. And thank you, Professor Daryaee, Dr. Reisinezhad, for coming. It was very informative. And I also thank, again, Mr. Ali Hassani and Farshad Adel, who made this session possible. Thank you very much, and have a good day in Irvine and good night in Freiburg and Tehran.
Okay, good
Thank
night.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. خداحافظ شما.
خداحافظ. خداحافظ.
All friends, Lara, everybody.
خدا نگهدار.
خدا نگهدار. متشکرم. آقای نایب پور متشکرم.
خواهش میکنم. مرسی که اومدین آقای دکتر. خیلی
خواهش میکنم. باعث خوشحالی به آقای عادل. خیلی
آقای دکتر دریایی خیلی تشکر میکنم واقعا. لطف کردید واقعا جلسه.
آقای حسنی هر دوی شما
لطف دارید شما. ما که انجام وظیفه کردیم، زحمات اصلی به دوش دکتر نایب پور بود و شما که
کلی لطف کردیم. قربانش.
خیلی ممنونم آقای دکتر.
جناب پروفسور خیلی ممنون.
قربان شما آقای حسنی.
قربان شما برم، سلامت باشید. قربان شما. قربان شما. خداحافظ.
بعدم بگین که کلی طول میکشه تا ما خارج بشیم. خداحافظ شما.
خداحافظ شما. خداحافظ.
متشکرم. بابا.
Danke, Frau von Rheden. خیلی ممنونم آقای دکتر نایب پور. خیلی لطف کردید. حالا انشالله که جلسات بعداً
آقای نایب پور دستتون درد کنه. ممنون. لطف کردید. خدا نگهدار.
Bye, Sita. Thank you very much. It was.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
We were all doing Tarof before going out.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Dr.
Nayeb Pur, خداحافظ. خداحافظ.
Sorry, I mean, was I just missing? I was just.
No, it's usually a ceremony among Iranians when they want to say goodbye. They have another session for like 10 or 15 minutes before saying goodbye. So it was basically, nothing special. Thank you.
Right. Because I had to go away for 5 minutes because it's lunchtime, it's evening time, and so I had to. So sorry about that.
Everybody was just saying how. Thank you.
It was an excellent evening. I thought it was very instructive, and I think it worked very, very well. And thank you very much. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Interesting two people also. Well, I hope that sometime the corona is actually changing, and we can meet in person when I'm back in Freiburg, and then we can discuss Plato and Platonism in Iran.
And I hope we can have more of these with Mr. Hassani and Adel. They have they're brilliant minds to set these type of dialogues with academics together. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to continue in this session because your friends are still around?
No, I will just stop the recording and.